Kayla stepped out of her front door that morning with the rising sun reflecting off the dew-coated grass, her boots thudding softly against the sidewalk as she walked toward the bus stop she wore. Camouflage pants tucked neatly into combat boots, and a matching jacket that carried an air of purpose. It was not the casual kind of camo one found in stores for fashion. It was real, issued to her late father years ago, and altered slightly so it would fit her frame. She carried no backpack instead. A small military-style sling bag swung across her shoulder, her dark hair tied back into a tight ponytail as she stared straight ahead with eyes determined and distant. When she stepped on the bus, a hush fell over. The usual chatter students glanced at her, and then at each other, unsure how to react, before one boy snorted and muttered a comment that drew laughter. Kayla did not flinch. She simply took her seat at the back, looking out the window as the bus moved along, leaving the laughter behind. Louder hallways echoed with it as she stepped inside her, boots making sharp clacks against the linoleum floor. A group of girls near the lockers pointed and whispered. One even pulled out a phone, snapping a quick picture. While trying not to be obvious, another student laughed out loud, shouting something about how she was ready for war. The crowd erupted, but Kayla kept her head high and walked past them with the same calm expression. She had practiced that morning. She did not wear the uniform for them. She wore it for her father, her homeroom teacher. Paused when she walked in, eyes narrowing in mild confusion, but he said nothing, only marking her name. Off attendants and moving on students around her continued to giggle, one even pretending to duck behind his desk as if avoiding imaginary gunfire. She heard every sound, every whisper, but she said nothing instead. She focused on the notebook in front of her, her pen moving steadily across the page. For Kayla, this day was more than just another day. It was the anniversary of her father's passing. A man who had served with distinction in the army, flying helicopters and protecting lives. His uniform meant something sacred to her, something she refused to let ridicule taint. She had been told to expect a special visitor during lunch, a detail she kept to herself, knowing it would change everything by the end of first period. The laughter had only grown as pictures of her already began circulating. Online captions, mocking her choice of clothes, calling her things she did not care to read. She scrolled briefly, then shut her phone off, choosing to focus instead on her father's memory and the reason. She had walked out her front door wearing camo when everyone else chose jeans and hoodies. She was prepared for a storm of jokes, but also for the silence that would soon follow when truth landed right in front of them. The bell rang, signaling the end of homeroom, and Kayla moved through the hallways with the same deliberate calm as before, while the whispers followed her like shadows. Students leaned against lockers, pretending to check their phones, but really taking more pictures, some even filming her as she passed and whispering to friends who stifled laughter. One boy in a varsity jacket made a joke about her going duck hunting at lunch, and his friends burst into laughter loud enough for half the hallway to hear, but Kayla did not respond. She had learned to build a wall around herself, and today that wall stood stronger than ever when she entered her second period class. The teacher paused and gave her a long look before simply gesturing to her seat and continuing with the lesson. Kayla opened her notebook again and began writing down notes, as if nothing unusual was happening, while students behind her snickered and tapped each other on the shoulders to point toward her camo uniform. One girl whispered something about Spirit Week and another about cosplay, and yet nobody dared to actually ask her why she was wearing it. They were content with making assumptions from a distant Kayla's phone buzzed in her pocket, but she ignored it. She knew it would be more messages from classmates sharing screenshots and posts from social media, where already pictures of her were trending in their small circle. She had expected this the moment she zipped up the jacket this morning and laced her boots tight. She had known the jokes would come. She had prepared for them emotionally because she knew what was scheduled to happen later in the die-in, the middle of class. One boy leaned forward and whispered, asking if she lost a bet. Kayla simply turned slightly to look at him, her expression calm and unreadable, before turning back to the front of the class without saying a single word. This only fueled more quiet laughter behind her, but she stayed focused as if the room around her did not exist by the time third period rolled around. Teachers had started noticing the unusual attention she was getting. One asked if everything was okay. She nodded quickly, replying that she was fine, though inside her stomach churned from the weight of so many eyes on her. She reminded herself why she wore the uniform. and why she had promised her brother. She would not let anyone shake her confidence. It was not about them, or even about her. It was about honoring the man who had given her everything and the person who would soon walk into her life again after being gone so long. The clock ticked slowly toward noon each, a reminder that everything would soon change for Kayla and for everyone else in that building. At lunch, a moment was coming that no one expected, one that would silence the laughter and turn confusion into awe. But for now, she endured the whispers and the laughs, with quiet strength holding on to the memory of her father and the promise of what was about to unfold. Kayla stepped out of her third period class and felt the energy shift slightly in the hallway. As more students had now noticed the posts online, some laughing as they scrolled through their phones, showing each other pictures of her with captions about hunting or joining the army. One even joked loudly about her being drafted already, and everyone around him burst into laughter. Yet Kayla kept walking her head high and eyes straight ahead, because she had promised herself she would not break. Not today. She moved toward her locker, slowly opened it, and took out her lunch, her hands steady despite the noise around her. A few kids nearby whispered about taking another picture, but then hesitated, perhaps feeling the chill in her demeanor. Her calmness was starting to unsettle some who expected her to snap back or run away. Instead, she was like stone, and that silence carried more weight than any words could. As she walked toward the cafeteria, she could hear the mocking footsteps of a group behind her, one imitating the sound of a marching drill, another humming a military tune. It made the group laugh louder, and yet Kayla did not react. Her face held that same distant focus, as if she could not hear them at all, which in truth, she barely did, because her mind was somewhere else, thinking of her father and what he would say if he saw her standing tall in front of all these people who did not understand. Inside the cafeteria, she sat at an empty table and unwrapped her simple lunch. While conversations continued around her, several students looked her way with curiosity mixed with hesitation. They had seen how calm she remained despite being the focus of half the school's jokes, and it confused them. Most people would have shouted back or broken down, but not Kayla. She chewed her food, quietly scanning the clock on the far wall. She knew it was almost time, almost noon, and that thought brought her a quiet sense of power. Meanwhile, teachers in the staff room were talking quietly. To some had seen the online posts and were concerned, but others shrugged it off, thinking it was just harmless fun. One teacher, though, knew about the planned visit at lunch, but kept it to himself. He had been told to keep the surprise, and so he watched from a distance as Kayla sat alone, but with an unshakable calm. The seconds ticked closer to noon, and she could feel her heartbeat quicken. Though she kept her face neutral, she picked up her tray and began walking to the door of the cafeteria. Students watched her, curious about where she was going, some laughing again, thinking she was being dramatic. But when she stepped outside onto the courtyard, her pace slowed as she lifted her eyes toward the sky, listening carefully for a sound she had not heard in months, a deep, rhythmic pulse of rotor blades far in the distance, still faint, but growing louder. That was when the first heads turned. That was when confusion began, replacing laughter, because something was happening that no one expected, and Kayla knew it was only the beginning. The distant thumping started faint, like a faraway drumbeat carried on the wind. At first, nobody paid it much attention, but Kayla froze in her steps, her head tilting slightly as she recognized the sound, her heart pounding faster every second. Then students began to notice it, two heads lifting from their phones and lunch trays as they turned their ears toward the sky, some thinking it was thunder, others muttering about construction. But the rhythmic pattern kept growing louder and louder, until there was no mistaking it. A helicopter was approaching, and not just any helicopter. Teachers rushed toward the courtyard doors, telling students to stay inside, but curiosity pulled them forward, one by one, until dozens were standing at the windows and pushing through the doors, phones in hand, to capture whatever was about to happen. Kayla stood still in the middle of the courtyard, her boots rooted to the ground as the sound grew louder and heavier, the air vibrating with each powerful rotation of the blades, the wind beginning to kick up around her, sending loose paper and dust swirling. Then it appeared over the treetops, a sleek black silhouette slicing through the bright noon sky, its sides glinting in the sunlight. As it banked slightly and began its descent, gasps echoed across the courtyard. Someone shouted, "Is that a Black Hawk?" And instantly more students bolted outside, unable to contain their shock. Phones already raised, filming every second. The helicopter hovered briefly, then descended slowly toward the open field behind the school, kicking up dirt and leaves in a furious storm, the sound overwhelming, so loud it drowned out every voice. The school principal hurried out his tie, flapping in the wind, his voice yelling for students to move back and clear the field, but few listened. All eyes were locked on the machine, touching down its landing skids, kissing the grass as the rotor continued, spinning violently, blowing hair clothes and backpacks in every direction. Kayla stood firm, eyes locked on the aircraft. As the side door slid open with a metallic clank out, stepped several uniformed soldiers. Their gear clean, their posture sharp, one of them wearing aviator sunglasses, scanned the crowd, then locked eyes with Kayla and smiled, walking directly toward her. In long, purposeful strides in front of the entire school, the soldier stopped and raised his hand in a crisp salute, which Kayla returned with a shaky hand, her eyes wet, though she tried to keep it hidden. The laughter from earlier had gone silent, every student, every teacher watching without a single word. The soldier then turned to the crowd and announced her name, along with a brief explanation. She had been invited as part of a special tribute to her father, who had served and given everything for his country. Another soldier stepped out, holding a folded American flag, and handed it gently to Kayla, who clutched it to her chest, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Thank you," barely audible over the sound of the rotors, but clear in the silence of Otha Black. Hawk sat there like a beast at rest, the sunlight gleaming off its black panels, while students filmed every angle, realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. And Kayla, standing in her camo uniform, no longer looked strange to anyone. She looked like someone carrying a story bigger than any of them could have imagined. The courtyard fell into a stunned hush. As the soldier who saluted Kayla stepped aside, and another figure emerged from the Black Hawk. His steps strong and deliberate, the kind of walk that spoke of training, discipline, and experience. His flight suit marked with patches that hinted at years of service, his face hidden momentarily by the glare of the sun until he removed his helmet, revealing familiar eyes. Kayla froze, her breath catching in her throat as recognition hit her. It was her older brother Nathan, the one she had not seen for over a year since he deployed overseas. Students around her gasped, some whispering to each other as they pieced together the truth, the uniform, the way she walked, the salute. This was no joke. This was not some Spirit Week stunt or a lost bet. It was family service and sacrifice converging in one powerful moment. Nathan approached her with a wide grin and open arms. She rushed forward, unable to hold back anymore, and hugged him tight as the crowd erupted into cheers and applause, phones recording every second, while teachers stood quietly, some wiping away tears. Nathan pulled back slightly, looking at her camo uniform, and smiled with pride. "You wore it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Kayla nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve. "I told you I would," she replied softly, and held up the folded flag given to her moments earlier. Nathan placed his hand over hers, steady and reassuring, then turned to face the students and teachers who stood in awe. He spoke loudly over the hum of the still spinning rotors, explaining that today marked the anniversary of their father's passing, a man who had served courageously, flying missions that saved countless lives. Nathan had arranged this landing as a way to honor him and to show gratitude to his sister for carrying their father's memory so boldly, even when it meant standing alone in front of others who did not understand at first. His words carried weight, cutting through the air and finding their way into the hearts of everyone listening. The principal finally stepped forward, shaking Nathan's hand and thanking him for his service, while apologizing quietly for the earlier behavior of some students. Nathan simply smiled, saying it was part of life. People misunderstand until they see the whole picture. He gestured toward Kayla, who stood straighter than ever, her hands gripping the folded flag to her chest, while her eyes scanned the crowd faces that earlier carried mocking grins now reflected guilt and admiration. Some students who had laughed the loudest looked away, unable to meet her eyes, while others stepped forward tentatively, offering small nods and whispers of respect. It was as if the entire social order of the school shifted in one afternoon. The girl they had mocked for looking different was now a symbol of courage, resilience, and love for family and country. The Black Hawk crew began to step back toward the aircraft, preparing for departure. But Nathan remained with his sister, holding her close as the reality of the moment settled over everyone, and what had started as a day of ridicule had transformed into something unforgettable for every person present. When the rotor blades slowed and the Black Hawk powered down, the silence in the courtyard felt almost unreal, Only moments before laughter and whispers had filled the halls. And now the only sound was the shuffle of shoes as students slowly stepped forward, unsure how to react. Nathan kept one arm around Kayla, still holding her close as she gripped the folded flag like a lifeline. Her face streaked with quiet tears, but her posture straight, strong, and unshaken. The principal cleared his throat and spoke softly, telling everyone what they had just witnessed was not a performance or a stunt, but a tribute to a man who had served his country with honor and to a family who had sacrificed more than most could imagine. His words carried through the crowd and made several students lower their heads, some embarrassed by the way they had acted. Earlier phones lowered one by one as the reality of what had happened truly sank. Ina boy from the varsity team, the same one who had joked about her going hunting, stepped forward slowly, his face red as he muttered an apology to Kayla. Barely looking up, she met his eyes for only a second and nodded without anger or pride. Simply acknowledgement. Another girl approached quietly, placing a hand on Kayla's shoulder, whispering that she was sorry for laughing and that her outfit now made perfect sense. Others followed hesitantly, each apology different, but all sincere. The earlier ridicule melting away under the weight of what they had learned. Accepted their words with quiet grace. She had not worn the uniform for their approval or validation. She had worn it for her father and for herself, but still the change in tone touched her because it showed people could grow if given a reason to understand. Nathan watched, silently smiling proudly at his sister, knowing she had shown more strength in a single morning than most could show in a lifetime. Teachers approached next, shaking Nathan's hand, thanking him for his service and for giving the students a lesson they would never forget. Some even admitted they had thought her clothing choice odd at first, but now saw it for what it truly was, an act of honor and remembrance. Nathan nodded to each one, then stepped back, pulling something from his bag. It was a small patch, the kind given to unit members after a mission. He placed it in Kayla's hand, saying he wanted her to have it as a reminder that she carried her father's legacy well, and that he was proud of her. For Kayla, the moment it was overwhelming but also healing, because for so long she had carried her grief quietly alone, thinking nobody at school would ever understand what her family had been through. But now, standing in the middle of that courtyard with her brother by her side and the folded flag against her chest, she felt understood in a way she had not expected. The crew signaled to Nathan that it was time to leave soon. The Black Hawk would lift off again. But before leaving, Nathan hugged his sister one last time, whispering how proud he was and that he would call tonight to talk more. Kayla nodded, holding back tears as she stepped aside, ready to watch them go, while the rest of the students stood in respectful silence, waiting for the powerful machine to take to the skies again. As the Black Hawk roared back to life and began to lift from the school field, a wave of warm air and dust swept over the crowd. Students shielded their faces, but no one moved away, their eyes locked on the helicopter as it rose higher and higher, before tilting slightly and vanishing into the horizon. Only when the sound faded completely did anyone take a breath. The silence that followed was heavy, not awkward, but filled with the weight of what everyone had just seen. Kayla stood still in the middle of the courtyard, the folded flag cradled in her arms, and her camo uniform now seen in a completely different light. Students who had mocked her only hours earlier were no longer laughing. Instead, they approached one by one, offering words of apology and respect. One girl said she was sorry for taking photos, another said he should never have made jokes about hunting trips, and a few admitted they had shared memes online but promised to delete them. Kayla simply nodded to each one, her voice soft but steady, saying she understood and that it was in the past. The principal stepped forward, clearing his throat, his voice stronger now as he addressed the students, telling them this was a moment they would never forget, that today had taught them more about respect than any lesson plan ever could. He placed a hand gently on Kayla's shoulder, thanking her for her courage and for honoring her father so openly. Kayla gave a faint smile, but said nothing, because words felt too small for everything she was feeling. In the cafeteria, later at lunch, students who had been strangers to her before now invited her to sit with them. Some asked about her father and brother, their voices full of genuine curiosity rather than mockery. Kayla spoke softly, sharing bits of her father's story, how he flew helicopters similar to the one they had seen, how he believed in protecting others no matter the cost, how his loss had shaped her life in ways she never talked about until now. The Students listened intently, many of them fidgeting as if uncomfortable with how wrong they had been earlier. That morning, by the end of the day, the whispers had completely stopped. There were no more snickers in the hallways, no more hidden phones. Snapping pictures instead, there were nods of respect, quick waves, and even a few quiet thank yous. Kayla walked through the halls, no longer feeling like an outsider, but like someone who had been seen, truly seen for who she was and what she carried when she reached her locker. She opened it slowly, placing the folded flag inside her bag with great care, and for the first time that day she exhaled deeply, the tension leaving her body. She realized she no longer felt alone. The uniform had done more than honor her father. It had revealed her own strength and shown others that there was always a story behind the choices people make, stories worth hearing before judging. The final bell rang and the halls filled with students, but the atmosphere felt completely different from the morning. There was no laughter, no mocking whispers, only quiet conversations and the occasional respectful glance in Kayla's direction. She walked steadily through the hallway, her boots clicking softly against the tile floor, the folded flag secure in her bag, her father's uniform still crisp and neat despite the long emotional day. As she stepped outside into the warm afternoon air, several students were waiting near the bus loop, some of the same ones who had laughed at her earlier. They approached nervously, one boy holding his phone awkwardly in his hands. Before speaking, "I deleted those pictures," he said, his voice quiet and sincere. Another girl added, "I posted something nice instead, and it already has a lot of likes. We wanted people to know what really happened today." Kayla paused for a moment, taking in their words, then offered a small nod and said, "Thank you," her voice calm but warm. And the bus ride home, things were different to people who normally ignored her. Now greeted her with smiles. Some even asked about her brother and what it was like to see him land in a Black Hawk. She answered simply, saying it was amazing and that she was proud of him and their father. She spoke not for attention, but because the questions felt honest, not mocking. For the first time, she felt like people actually wanted to understand. When she stepped off the bus near her home, the folded flag felt heavier in her hands, but not because of sadness. Instead, it carried a new kind of weight, a sense of pride and connection. She had not felt in a long time. Her father was gone, but his memory had just touched an entire school in a way she never expected. She walked inside quietly, placing the flag on a shelf above the fireplace, next to a photo of her father in his flight suit, smiling proudly. That evening, her phone buzzed nonstop as classmates sent messages of support, some apologizing again, some thanking her for showing them what courage looked like. She responded to each one simply and without anger. She had never wanted revenge, only understanding, and it seemed she finally had. Either brother called later that night, his voice full of pride. He told her how impressed he was by her strength and how their father would have been proud too. They talked about everything from school to memories of their father to the future, and for the first time in months, Kayla laughed freely, letting go of the tension she had carried for so long. The next morning, she woke up and saw her uniform neatly folded on the chair by her bed. She smiled because she knew she would wear it again someday, not for attention, but for what it represented. She had shown her classmates that behind every uniform is a story, and behind every story is a person worth respecting. And from that day forward, whenever people at school saw Kayla, they did not see a joke. They saw a girl who stood tall for something bigger than herself, and it changed them all in ways words could never fully describe.